Hello, this is Jerry. Hey, it's only September, but never too early to talk about a Christmas topic, the Magi. Is there anyone listening who, like me as a child, thought there was a country called Orient Are from the We Three Kings hymn? Let's read Matthew 2, starting in verse 1, and we'll make our way through this passage. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Well, this was Herod the Great. In the last few years of his reign, Magi traveled to Jerusalem from the east, that is, from Mesopotamia, where the Babylonian and Persian kingdoms had been, but then at the time the kingdom of Parthia. The Magi were the scholars consulted by their kings. Remember, the Jews had been taken there in the Babylonian captivity, and Daniel became one of their court advisors. Now, that was over 500 years before Christ, but we think the influence of Daniel and some of his colleagues was so profound that in this time God still had a remnant there. In the Old Testament book of Ezra, it took him and his caravan about 4 months to make this 900-mile journey to Jerusalem. We just can't imagine traveling that long to a destination today. And the Magi were looking forward to the Messiah, just like Anna and Simeon. And God communicated somehow to these Magi and gave them a miraculous star that led them to Jerusalem. And where they asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. By the way, we don't know that there were 3 Magi. 3 comes from the 3 gifts, assuming each had one of those gifts. And that notion has been around a long time. Here's art from the Roman Empire around AD 250, showing 3 persons. But at least one was a woman, some think, because they stopped in Jerusalem for directions, and no man would have ever done that. Ha! Scholars guess Jerusalem held between 40 to 65,000 people then. So think of Jerusalem then like North Fort Myers, Florida, now across the river from me, which has about 43,000 people. Naturally, the Magi assumed Jerusalem as the logical residence for the Messiah, and so everyone on the street should know. How surprised the Magi were that no one knew, and they kept asking around. Evidently, the Magi didn't have the book of Micah in their library. Micah 5:2 prophesied, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times." Now, this was a clear prophecy of the Messiah for the Jews. And that word Ephrathah is just another nickname for that region, meaning fruitful. So God, in his sovereignty, used the Magi's lack of knowledge. However, the Jews of Jerusalem did have Micah, and we might assume every good Jew knew this prophecy. However, that was not the case. If so, this would have come out in their answers. Like, the Messiah is born? Really? Then that would have been in Bethlehem. And perhaps this is just like mainline Christianity today, where, well, I guess a lot of people don't know their Bibles very well. And there was a mainline Judaism then as well. The effect of the Magi asking around was that all Jerusalem was disturbed by this. Very interesting phrase. All of Jerusalem was buzzing about this. So, in a curious way, the Lord was sovereignly using even the people's ignorance of this Bethlehem prophecy, because they're all hearing about the birth of their own Messiah through these unique visitors and the subsequent grapevine. The hearers included Herod the Great, who was super alarmed. He was a paranoid and violent ruler, a really bad combination. He killed his wife and 2 of his sons, along with various others, just to drop some royal gossip. A royal title we know that he liked was King of the Jews. And here came these Magi asking, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews?" So Herod, when he had called together all the chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah." We read this already. "For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Herod now had a Jewish problem. In kingly fashion, he had summoned all the Jewish leaders, perhaps including the Sanhedrin, or the 70 rulers, and the high priest. Now, receiving sudden notice for all the Jewish leaders to assemble from the paranoid and violent Herod may have been probable cause for a heartfelt goodbye to your family on your way out the door. Herod asked them all a question. "Do you know where the Messiah is to be born?" Well, of course they knew. All of them, as leaders, would have known this. And all of them would have wanted to answer, "Ooh, pick me." The fortunate Jew or Jews who gave the selected text quoted the verse. Herod's Jewish problem now has a place name: Bethlehem. Really? A sleepy little town 6 miles south of Jerusalem with about 300 people? If you live near where I do, in Fort Myers, Florida, think of a town like Matlacha with about 500 people, 12 miles west of North Fort Myers, which is our Jerusalem comparison. Herod's Jewish problem would be helped by answering another question as well. When? Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Herod reeled in the wise men. He questioned when the star first appeared, assuming this marked the exact birth time. And he knew about the star because the Magi had been saying, "We have seen his star." The Magi probably noted a time, however many months prior. Herod then did a surprising thing. He instructed the Magi to return to him later with the news so that he could also worship this new king. Now, he could have sent soldiers to kill the male children born within that time frame given by the Magi, but my guess here is that there still was an important part of the Jewish problem not defined. Who? He had the place and the time range, but which child? Because the parents could have moved that child in these however many months. Herod was not used to getting his news late. Now the child could be almost anywhere. I think Herod recognized that the Magi knew things that he and the Jewish leaders did not. Perhaps through divination or astrology or something, Herod was forced to trust that the Magi would both find the child and return to him. And most people did what Herod told them. Now, in hindsight, we can see how God sovereignly placed the Magi in Jerusalem at least some time, at least some months after the birth. And this led to uncertainty as to where the child was, with respect to Herod's murderous intent. And when the Magi left, the special star they first saw appeared again, and they were extremely glad over that. And I guess so, because it was probably a confusing experience there in Jerusalem. Nobody knew what the Magi were talking about, and then they were pulled into the king's court. So with that star reappearing, I think it was God saying, "You're right where you should be. Just follow." On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So this supernatural star now became their personal guide right to the house. Now, it may be that Joseph was at work, because the text says the Magi found Mary and the child and gave them these expensive gifts and worshiped Jesus. A beautiful picture to ponder, isn't it, here? Bartolome Murillo beautifully placed the eldest Magi on his knees close up to Jesus, as did Rembrandt, with the Magi's turban removed and on the ground, and another Magi standing, quite caught up in the moment. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come, peasant king, to own him. The King of Kings salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him. God warned the Magi in a dream not to return to Herod. Herod wins an Academy Award for most persuasive bad man. It appears they were set to go back to him. The songwriter, John Jacob Niles, wrote the Christian tune, "I Wonder as I Wander Out Under the Sky." And we reflect on what these wise men, Magi, pondered on the way home. Perhaps those thoughts included the striking contrast between the humble residence of the Messiah King with the kings of the earth, like Herod's palace, which they had just been in, and the fabulous royal courts the Magi served in, filled with royal servants. So who fetched the cups of water for these thirsty travelers when they arrived at the Bethlehem house? Probably Mary. No royal attendants. A most unkingly place. How about the obvious fame and the followers of the kings of the earth? Were it not for God's miraculous star, they would never have found Jesus, because his own people in Jerusalem did not know of his existence. What child is this? This divine king, their king, as Gentile converts to the faith. He was so humble, so hidden, so unknown, and so unlike any other majesties in the world. Yet, other than the Magi, the only one who seemed to be diligently seeking Jesus was Herod. And now they learned why. T.S. Eliot wrote concerning the Magi, "We return to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods." When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up and took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. So Joseph fled with his family to Egypt, out of the jurisdiction of Herod. And the Magi's gifts became wonderfully useful in funding their travel. We don't know exactly where they stayed in Egypt. There were a few Jewish communities there, the largest in Alexandria, but we don't know if they went that far. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Herod later realized that the Magi were not coming back. Not a good time to be near him, I'm sure. So he went to plan B. If he could not assassinate the king child specifically, he would attempt to kill him with a broad killing spree. He ordered all the male children 2 years and under to be slain in Bethlehem and the small region around it. Now, why just the small region? Because Herod did not rule all Israel, just Judea. And even if he attempted to kill all these children in his province, including Jerusalem, well, Emperor Caesar Augustus would have probably executed him or at least banished him. That's not how the Roman Empire worked at the time. Herod the Great had a big name, but limited power. He did what he felt he could get away with. He killed children in a handful of little towns off the beaten path, and I'm sure he did this as secretly as he could. Scholars have estimated that there were maybe 20 to 40 victims. This event we call the Massacre of the Innocents was captured so powerfully here by the French painter Cogniet in 1824. The mother hides, and with all her being commands us as the viewers through her eyes to rescue her, or at least not to betray her and her child. Herod died in his 69th year in March 4 BC. The first century historian Josephus tells us that Herod ordered a number of people to be executed on the day he died, just to guarantee this would be a day of mourning and not celebration. Fortunately, that order was not carried out, because nobody was as mean as Herod. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." So Joseph and Mary journeyed all the way up to Nazareth, where it all started with Mary and the angelic vision. The persecution against Joseph, Mary, and Jesus was, in the big picture, Satan trying to kill the promised Messiah. "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." That was the first prophecy of a coming deliverer, later called the Messiah, who would defeat Lucifer. The killing of this deliverer would be Lucifer's #1 priority. Notice the prophetic picture of this in Revelation 12. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Here's a picture of Mary, that seed of the woman according to Genesis 3, that prophecy, and of the 12 tribes of Israel, the stars on her head. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. Now we see Satan, Lucifer, with all these horns and crowns, perhaps representing all the kingdoms he controls. The third of the stars flung to the earth, probably this third of the angelic host he turned to become his demonic army against God. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Lucifer was after that Messiah, but God intervened, and the outcome was never in doubt. But the point here is that Satan found his assassin in Herod the Great. However, as T. DeWitt Talmage once said, despots may plan and armies may march, but the mighty men of the earth are only the dust of the chariot wheels of God's providence. Finally, who was invited to celebrate the birth of the Messiah? Well, the shepherds, Elizabeth, Zechariah, Anna and Simeon, and the Magi came in a little later. How about all those Jews living in the capital city of Jerusalem? Not invited. But then again, maybe they were, because God first took the Magi through Jerusalem, and all of Jerusalem was stirred with this news. And that constituted in some way an invitation to ask their teachers about that birth and then go. They were stirred up, Matthew said, but not productively stirred up. That is, to put their stirred up energy and curiosity about the Messiah, is he here? Where would he be? And then go to find and welcome him. As far as the Jewish leaders who did know where he would be born, what more important task would there be than to help Israel embrace their Messiah? They should have corroborated the Bethlehem story, then joyously led the Jerusalem Jews there to worship and celebrate. Now, that would have been a glorious day. But as far as we know, none of the Jewish leaders traveled there. But then there was Herod, a risky time to show loyalty to this child king Messiah when Herod was scheming his assassination. How much were the leaders willing to risk to find the Messiah? It's an interesting scenario God put them in, don't you think? So maybe we should not think of the first Christmas as an event revealed only to a few. And the message was delivered to Jerusalem by God-fearing Gentiles, a remnant from their terrible Babylonian captivity, from as far east in the world as they could fathom. Nobody but God himself could create such an amazing story. The Magi were undistracted and undeterred from their highest calling to seek Jesus the Messiah, to worship him, and to give him a token of the gifts that God had already gifted them. And come to think of it, isn't that exactly what we are called to do? To seek and worship the Lord and to give back to him of what he has given to us in our gifts, in our talents, and in our things. Malcolm Gwiet wrote some verse about the Magi, concluding, "Their courage gives our questing hearts a voice to seek, to find, to worship, to rejoice." Thanks very much.